All right, my talk today is an extension of my last talk called With God, All Things Are Possible. That was taken from Matthew 19, verse 26. I wrote that talk in part because I was trying to loosely replicate one of my favorite talks of all time from Brother Baron Duncan, who had done a talk called Bounds. And it was about how God had ordered every physical system in the universe and that everything is interconnected while also being independent and built to sustain itself. Bounds like boundary of a lake, and how, yes, while sometimes water does go over its banks, for the most part, water stays where water is. And that's by grand design. Um, I think that we were both trying to show that God's creation was life and that God created life to sustain itself through system upon system. And what I was trying to show was that because of the enormity of all these systems in creation, that this was a proof that with God, all things are possible. And I thought I was done with the subject, but I think there's a little bit more of the story to tell, and that's because of God's love. I was watching TV and the Russian-Ukrainian war was on, and I had this swelling feeling. And I didn't just see the horrors of those afflicted by war, mankind killing mankind. What I saw was an attack on creation. And that was an attack by Satan because creation was killing creation. And I saw an attack on the fulcrum of creation. I saw an attack on love. Pastor Russell said on love, this is the grand expression of the Bible, the keynote of Christianity. It is the foundation of the great plan of creation and redemption, and the underlying principle in the structure of the Word of God. God is love, eternal and unchangeable. All that he has done or will do can but express his infinite fullness. All his attributes are moved and controlled by love. So I decided to extend the talk about God's love in a hope that I can say aloud a small sliver of God's love in an effort to help Earth and all those man, beast, earth, and forest, all those that reside on her, and not lose the understanding of God's love and the robustness of life it affords and the hope for the future it allows. Okay, so that's what we're talking about today. All right, for God so loved the world, God's love explained. God loves his creation. If you want proof, look no further than yourself. Did you ask to be born, or were you given this gift of existence? Look no further than all of creation itself. Does creation abide? Did God provide creations for his creations to sustain on? Before we talk about God's love, we should start with a little bit about love in general, which is a little backwards because as God created everything and God is love, we should probably start with him, but God's love is also much bigger. So I think at least for now, we start a little bit more shallow. In Greek, they had four types of love. Storge, that's affection between, a love between family. Philia, love between friends. Eros, love between lovers or sweethearts. And agape, love in the Christian sense. God's love for man and the Christian's love for the brethren. And there are more. There's also disinterested and interested love. Disinterested is a love for the object for what it is in itself, needing nothing from it other than its mere existence, and interested love being the opposite. Interested love being given on account of what the lover receives, benefits, or can potentially receive from the lovee. For all of the parents out there, you probably love your kids disinterestedly, but you probably love your financial advisor interestedly, and not so much in the past few weeks. We also have heard of duty love, which is brotherly love, but was a kind of. Brother Johnson writes of duty love and disinterested love. The love of justice is duty love. The love of charity is disinterested love. By duty love, the love that is by right owed to others is meant. By disinterested love, the love that apart from obligation is given out of a delight in good principles is meant. In duty love, we love God for the good he has done us. We love our neighbor as we would have him or her love us. But in disinterested love, we love God and others because we delight in good principles and apart from any selfish consideration. And there are even more types of love that were just mentioned. And there's a summation for us on love, and it's given in Romans 13:8. Owe no man anything but to love one another, for he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Brother Johnson also taught us about God's higher primary graces, of which one was love, others being wisdom, justice, charity, and power. The first element in God's love is delight in or appreciation of good principles. He delights in, i.e., appreciates them because they are good. In E Volume 1, God, as you research all of God's attributes and grace, you find that in each of the studies is a love for justice, a love for wisdom, and so on and so on and so forth. On the right here is a small paragraph that delves into this love. And the book of God is riddled with examples of what God loves. In the 547-page book, God, the word love appears 719 times. Inside wisdom is love. Inside power is love. Inside justice is love. In 1 John 4:16, we read, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. Okay, so let's talk about God's love exemplified. In my opinion, our life and our world is an environmental love story that points directly to the love God has given to us. Brother Johnson explains, all of God's acts, some more or less, manifest his love in or more of its four elements. This will appear from a consideration of his acts. His creative acts are all more or less an expression of love. For an ultimate analysis, creation exists as a product of and as a sphere for activity of God's love in the blessing of being in harmony with good principles. Let's look at some examples. Okay, bees. Beekeepers are some of the longest living people on Earth. Did you guys know that? Scientists think it has something to do with the vibrational tunes that the bees set off when they fly. Speaking of that, and I'm not sure this part's true, but I saw a video the other day about bees, and it said that they don't actually fly. They vibrate in a way that is in tune with the frequency of the Earth, and that sets them aloft. Something called resonant frequency. What has been verified, and there was an entomologist at Washington State University who was quoted talking about how bees fly. He said that when bees churn their wings, they spin the air around them, twisting wings, create a vortex, a small tornado, rotating the air around them. Bees can lift up their body, up, down, forward, backwards, and they can even hover in midair. Oh, and they also produce honey, and that honey can last for thousands of years. It is said that if the bees die, humans will follow shortly because bees are the Earth's great pollinators and will run out of food without bees. The separate yet interconnected components of the honeybee, its aeronautical properties, its healing properties, its agricultural properties, its output properties, are just a fraction of all the components of its makeup and interactions with the rest of creation. For example, I didn't mention how they sit within the larger food web system. All of those things, and there are many more components revolving around just one species, that's God's love. And there are a near infinite number of examples we could use. Look at the miracle of the human body. The DNA in your body, and who remembers this from biology, deoxyribonucleic acid is an organic chemical that contains genetic information and instruction for protein synthesis. DNA is a key part of reproduction in which genetic heredity occurs through the passing down of DNA from parent or parents to offspring. There are 4 nucleotides or bases in DNA: adenine, A, cytosine, C, guanine, G, and thymine, T. These bases form specific pairs, A with T and G with C. And for every one of your cells, these pairs chain up. And with just those 4 letters, in every one of your 100 trillion cells, the chain is 3.5 billion letters long. That's God's love. You have a healing factor. Every one of us is going through autophagy right now, where our bodies are cleaning up dead cells for the creation of new cells. Everyone listening to this right now who is at least 10 years old, maybe older, but their cells are not. The average age of cells is 7 to 10 years. So you may be 65 years old, but your cells are only 7 to 10 years old. I saw a video of a nurse who works with people with addiction issues, whether that addiction be drugs, alcohol, food, whatever the addiction is. And if you're with her, your addiction has got you into a pretty bad spot. And the nurse in this particular case was working with someone who had advanced diabetes, and then they got COVID. And the nurse was talking about how the person had kind of given up on their diabetic management, and that they hadn't, if they hadn't, they wouldn't have been so sick from COVID. And then she started crying, and I thought that the crying was a little bit odd because she was crying because of the person's organs. She was talking about how hard they were working despite how poorly the person that they were serving had treated their organs in their unhealthy lifestyle. She said, our organs just try so hard no matter what. And then her point was, so, live a healthy lifestyle. But she said, the organs don't ever stop. Your organs will not give up, not until they are forced to through some amount of force or damage. The organs in your body are programmed to fight and fight and fight and keep going regardless of how well they are cared for. That's God's love. The earth has water to drink, food to eat, for every creature that needs water and who needs to eat. By the way, they say that cats' purrs are healing, so snuggle up to your cat and give them some love, and the energy produced will benefit you both. That's part of God's love. And speaking of the world, God put us in charge of that. I think I knew I was on the right track because you guys delivered half my talk over the last 2 days I've been watching on YouTube. But in Genesis 1:26, it's written, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. And I wonder the question, I think somebody else mentioned this as well. How well are we in taking care of ourselves as a species? And how well are we taking care of others? And how well are we doing as a steward of our planet? In the fall, with Satan's help, we messed that stewardship up. We messed that stewardship up of God's gift and our posts of command. Brother Russell said, the wickedness of Satan in rebellion, ingratitude, deceitfulness, power grasping, and tyrannizing over the debauchery of the race for many millennia, in entrapping the incautious angels before the flood, in organizing and administrating a kingdom opposing God's plan, and in seeking most wickedly to blaspheme and misrepresent God's character, person, word, and work, to thwart God's work, to seduce his servants, to incite others against them, and to do them into ruin and death, has undoubtedly occasioned God to exercise self-control and patience as he, in spite of these things, proceeded on his course of carrying out his plan in loving his creation in their salvation. Which is what I saw in that war video, many factors, but what I saw was an attack on creation and an attack on love, on the love that God built with us and instilled in us toward each other and our planet. I don't know if Roberta's here, but in the South, there's a saying, if you're going through some work with your kids, you are paying for your raising, meaning that you are paying a price for the cost it had to raise that you incurred when you were a child. But I think I would argue that that's in opposition to how God set things up from the beginning. Life is set up for sustenance. The air that we breathe, at least right now, is free. So take a big breath. It's only greed and the cost to source sustenance that requires some kind of charge currently. And speaking of interesting thoughts that can help break down walls between people, even people who are different than we, and borders between nations. I read this the other day. You know what country gods is? It's the universe. Okay, enough on that. That's the negative side that I'm trying to combat. Let me get back to the positive side. So I think to help us better capture God's love, in order to get to we need to get we need to get some help from a couple folks. First, I'd like to get some help from David. You ever just love somebody, not really sure why? You just like their style or the way that they hold themselves or the way that they act. Maybe you connect with them because they have the same mindset. I think the next talk I'll do will be on David. I found it interesting in the talks that came earlier today as well. But in 1 Kings 15:14, we understand that God loved David, warts and all, because, and it says, because the Lord loved David, the Lord gave him a kingdom in Jerusalem and allowed him to have a son to be king after him. And the Lord also kept Jerusalem safe. In 1 Samuel 13:14, it says that David was a man after God's own heart. And being a man after God's own heart, he had tremendous capacity for love. And David loved God right back. In Psalms, he talks about it a lot. Psalms 145, I'll just, I'm going to paraphrase through this because it's fairly long, but it's praised by David. I exalt, so this is David talking to God. Praised by David, I exalt thee, my God, O King, and bless thy name to the age and forever. Great is Jehovah, the glory of thy majesty, and thy matters of thy wonders I declare. The memorial of abundance of thy good and of thy goodness they set forth. Gracious and merciful is Jehovah, slow to anger and great in kindness. Good is Jehovah to all, and his mercies are over all his works. Thy kingdom is a kingdom of all ages, and thy dominion is in all generations. Jehovah is supporting all who are falling. The eyes of all unto thee do look, and thou art giving them their food in its season, opening thy hand and satisfying the desire of every living thing. Righteousness is Jehovah in all his ways, and kind in all his works. Near is just Jehovah to all those calling to him, to all those who call him in truth. The desire of those fearing him he doth, and their cry he heareth and saveth them. Jehovah persevereth all those loving him, and all the wicked he destroyeth. Maybe God loved Jehovah in the beginning because he gave God an example that mankind would attempt to accomplish a grand task set before them. Life and existence, after all, is a grand task, a much larger one than even compared to a young shepherd defeating a mighty, powerful, and seasoned warrior. So we know a little bit about how David saw God's love. Let's talk about the best example we've ever seen from a human on earth, Jesus. Jesus shows us how to connect to God through the way our Creator God intended. On John 3:16, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And he who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe in him is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, and they have been done in God. Jesus was here from the very beginning, so he understands how to be in harmony with God's creation. In Proverbs 8, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of his way, before he did his works of old. I have been established from everlasting, from the beginning, before there was ever an earth. And when he prepared the heavens, I was there. And when he marked the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him as the master craftsman. I was his daily delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in his habitations of the world. My delight was with the sons of men. Now therefore listen to me, my children, for blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not disdain it. When Jesus was here in the flesh on earth, he taught us how to live in harmony with God's intended modus operandi, or paradigm. I think that's what he meant by when he said, I am the way, I am the truth, and the light. As a human, Jesus said in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. If ye had known me, ye should know my Father also. From henceforth ye know him and have seen him. So let me see if I can get this right. I'm going to stop sharing for 2 seconds. I have a little video. It's not by us, but it's okay. And it talks about agape love. Let me share this. Share this sound. Make this big. Can you see this?
So if you've heard of Jesus, you probably
Did you hear that? Okay.
Yes.
know about one of his famous teachings called the Golden Rule. Do to others what you would want them to do to you. And this, actually, is a restatement of something else that Jesus said, that the meaning of life is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, that's really beautiful, but what does he mean exactly by the word love? It's an unclear word in English, because you can love your mom and you can love pizza. And if the word love means the same thing in both of those cases, your mom's gonna feel real bad. So what did Jesus mean in his language? Well, first of all, this love your neighbor phrase is a quotation from the Hebrew scriptures, where the word for love is ahava. However, the language Jesus spoke and taught in from day to day, it was a cousin language of Hebrew, that is Aramaic, in which the word for love is rachma. But then, as Jesus' followers spread his teachings around the world, they translated them into Greek, using the word agape. But here's what's fascinating. The earliest followers of Jesus, who wrote the books of the New Testament in Greek, they didn't learn the meaning of agape by looking it up in ancient dictionaries. Rather, they looked to the teachings of Jesus and the story of his life to redefine their very concept of love. So one time, Jesus was asked about the most important command in the Jewish scriptures, and he first quoted from the ancient prayer in the Torah called the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart. So love for God is the most important thing. But then Jesus quickly followed up by saying another command from the Torah was also the most important, to love your neighbor as yourself. So which is the most important, loving God or loving your neighbor? Jesus' answer is yes. To ask the question means you don't get his point. For Jesus, they are two sides of the same coin. Your love for God will be expressed by your love for people, and vice versa, they're inseparable. And so this makes it clear that for Jesus, agape love is not primarily a feeling for someone else that happens to you, like our phrase, I fell in love. For Jesus, love is action. It's a choice that you make to seek the well-being of people other than yourself. Jesus also went on to teach that genuine love for God and others means seeking people's well-being without expecting anything in return, especially from people who are in difficult situations, who can't repay you even if they wanted to. According to Jesus, this kind of generous love reflects the very heartbeat of God. And he took this even further. Jesus said that the ultimate standard of authentic love is how well you treat the person that you can't stand. Or in his words, you shall love your enemy and do good to them, expecting nothing in return. For Jesus, this kind of enemy-embracing love imitates the very character of God himself. Now, we wouldn't be talking about Jesus still today if he had only said things like love your enemy. This is how he actually lived. Jesus was constantly helping and serving the people around him in very practical and tangible ways. And he consistently moved towards poor and hurting people who couldn't benefit him in return. He showed love for the forgotten ones, the people who usually fall through the cracks. And when Jesus eventually marched into Jerusalem, he made himself an enemy of the leaders of his people by accusing them of hypocrisy and corruption. But then instead of attacking his enemies to overthrow them, he allowed them to kill him. Jesus died for the selfishness and corruption of his enemies because he loved them. After Easter morning, Jesus and then his followers claimed that it was the power of God's love for the world that was revealed in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. As the Apostle Paul put it, God demonstrated his own agape for us in this: while we were still sinners, the Messiah died for us. Or in the words of the Apostle John, God's own agape was revealed when he sent his one and only Son into the world so that through him we could have life. And for John, then, this leads naturally to the conclusion, beloved ones, if that's how God has loved us, then we ought to show love for one another. So Christian faith involves trusting that at the center of the universe is a being overflowing with love for his world, which means that the purpose of human existence is to receive this love that has come to us in Jesus and then to give it back out to others, creating an ecosystem of others-focused, self-giving love. And that's the New Testament meaning of agape love.
One second, please. Okay. We know God through Jesus by the way he gave love and taught us how to love. And God, in his love for the creation, his love for those he gave the gift of existence to, sent his word, who was with him in the beginning, his only begotten, to become a man and to cover up the sins. For what purpose? For the benefit of the created, so that they might retain the gift of life. Pastor Russell wrote, divine love at the suggestion of divine wisdom gave in John 3:16, the Logos became a perfect man with the right to human life and its pertinent life rights, and thus furnished an exact equivalent to the debt that involved Adam and his race before divine justice. Therefore, it could accept this equivalent for the debt, and thus canceled the latter. So as far as Adam and his race are concerned, Jesus's death was by way which he divested himself of his personal use of his perfect humanity, and with its right to life and life rights, and thereby he made the ransom price available for the payment of Adam's debt. You think about how hard it is to love someone or something that has done something wrong to us or an opposition to us in some way, even when that person is close to us. But God's love for us is so great. Even when we fall, we are provisioned for. Parents understand this kind of love, and it's proved in God's love for us. Despite our fall, he gives us hope over and over again. Taking Sarah, for example, in Isaiah, Sarah was preparing for a baby in her 90th year, and we're given a remarkable presentation of the grace features in the Abrahamic covenant as typed by Sarah. 54, seeing, O barren, thou house did not bear, enlarge thy place of thy tent, and let them stretch forth the curtains of thine habitation. Spare not, lengthen thy cords, and strengthen thy stakes. For a small moment I have forsaken thee, but with great mercies I will gather thee. I, in a little wrath, hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I will have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer. I believe it also pictures what we are currently going through. And as we will see in some 100,000 years, maybe even millions of years from now, that God's hidden face was just but for a moment and for our own good, and that we might taste what greed and vanity and all the things of the Lord's standard that are not of the Lord's standard for life. God also loves us when we are unlovable, when we are still sinners, and God demonstrates his own agape for us. Since God sees all, he knows his creation and understands why we got to where we are. I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to skip a little bit. Forgive me here. And speaking of the promised future, the way of the time, that consider what Jesus said in John 14. So we're talking about the promised future here. In 14 we read, let not your hearts be troubled. Ye believe in God, ye also believe in me. In my Father's house are many mansions, where if it were not so, I would have told you, go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive unto you into myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. And whither I go, and the way ye know. Again, Jesus said to them, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I'll end with something that we hear at weddings a lot. It's a good representation of what love is. And just to say in closing, I think love is under attack because it's probably the most powerful force in nature. I love God. I love Jesus. I love existence. I love all that dwells within it. And I love you too. And I'll leave you with this. It's a real short video. Thank you.